All right, this is a screencast to discuss some of the things that are going to be on the very first test. Obviously, the experimental design vocabulary will be on there, so make sure you're familiar with what all of the different things like independent variable, what that is. Remember, it's what you decide to change in the experiment. The different levels of the IV, which would be all the changes that you make to the independent variable, etc. So go through. One thing I think to really focus on is these 3 points on how you pick a control, and to remember about the format that the title has to be in. It has to be the effect of the IV on the DV. So pay attention to the format, and then also the format of the hypothesis has to be an if-then statement. That'll move us to this experimental design diagram template. Make sure that you can go through and know this template pretty well, remembering to always start with the independent variable, then move on to the dependent variable. And once again, here's the format for the way that they need to be worded. All right. Do not forget a control. All right. That's highlighted. I put it down as step 8. And remember that you need at least 3 constants. But this is all stuff we've had quizzes over and discussed, so I think you should be fine there. When it comes to the test, you're going to need to know the vocabulary. I really think you should study it on Quizlet. Remember, there's a video on how to use Quizlet, so make sure if you get confused, you can go back and source that. Notice here's all 26 words. Here's where to study. Also, it's located in Classroom. But make sure you go through and you know all 26 of those words. When you think you know all 26 of those words, I'll post this, a practice quiz, or you can make your own on Quizlet. Remember, I showed you how to do that. And on the test, it's going to be matching. So you might as well practice it as matching. And so give this practice quiz a chance. This one has 25 of the 26 words. I'm not sure which one's missing, but one of them is. And see if you can get that. If you can get all those, then you're doing well. When it comes to some of the short answer questions on the test, one of them is going to be covering the electromagnetic spectrum. And this is in your book. You'll need to resource that. And remember that you also have a worksheet that we did in class that you filled out the spectrum. Now, knowing what goes at these particular points, you're going to need to know for the test. So you'll need to know what has the longest wavelengths and what has the shortest wavelengths, and memorize them going across. Also, you'll have to know energy levels, low or high. So frequency, low or high, and wavelength, low or high. So take a look back at this worksheet. For the other short answer question, it's going to deal with this idea from our simulation. Think about when the skater is at its highest point. That's when the potential energy is the greatest. Then as the skater goes down the ramp, the potential energy is going to be converted into kinetic energy. And it's at this point where they'll both be about equal to one another. And then at the very bottom point, that would be where the speed would be the greatest, and also the kinetic energy would be the greatest. So go through and think about this lab. Along those same lines, think about a ball that is being thrown up in the air and then comes back down. All right, where at which point A, B, C, D, E would you have the most potential energy? And at what point A, B, C, D, or E would you have the least potential energy? Also, what point would you have the most kinetic energy, and at what point would you have the least amount of kinetic energy? Now, when it comes to the kinetic energy, that one's a little bit trickier. Think about this. As the ball gets thrown up, once it gets to the top, or its apex, it's for a very split second going to be motionless. It's going to come to a stop up here. Then, so since it's stopped, it's going to have the least amount of kinetic energy at point C. And then as it starts to fall, all right, it's going to gain speed, gain speed, gain speed, and it would, since it's falling below the point at which you threw it here, this is the point where it's going to have its most kinetic energy, all right? And then ultimately it would finally hit the ground. So, because gravitational potential energy is acting upon it. All right, well, those things, along with obviously reading your chapter and knowing the information in the chapter, but studying these points that I talked about in this screencast will help you prepare for your first test.